Hello, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 13 of Ludonarrative Dissidents, a podcast about role-playing games and how they're made. I'm James Wallace, and with me, as always, are Ross Payton and Greg Stolze, my constant companions in this voyage through the depths of role-playing game mechanics and what makes the games we love work. This episode, we're going to be talking about diceless games, a trend that emerged in the 90s and is still bizarrely controversial in some circles of games players and even games designers. The idea that you can do a role-playing game without dice, without random factors at all. I very nearly had one published by Eric Wujcik. I'm getting ahead of myself. The first commercial diceless game was, and I think I can say this without fear of first one in English. It's possible there are others in other languages I may not have heard of, but it was Amber Diceless Roleplay, released in 1991, designed by Eric Wujcik, whose reputation up to that point had been designing games for Palladium, particularly the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. Although much loved, is very much a product of its time. It's very much a post-D&D, very conventional system, and nobody was really expecting Eric to come out with something that would set the industry on its head. And yet Amber did. It's based on the Roger Zelazny books, 2 series of 5, The Chronicles of Amber, about a warring family of essentially they're superhumans. They have powers, primary among them, the ability to walk between parallel universes at will, which is really interesting. They walk the pattern as it's known, and they've essentially transformed the world around them, moving from one world to another. So instead of having your own kingdom, you tend to have your own universe, your own world, and then other people invade it or try and take it over. But you're warring siblings. And Eric was really interested in game design. I got in touch with him because at the time I was, I think I first got in touch with him, I was 20 or 21. I'd been doing a fanzine in the UK, which he had ordered copies of. And then we got corresponding. And then the first time I went over to the US, he invited me to come and stay with him and his girlfriend in Detroit, and then he would drive me up to Gen Con. Did this and had this fantastic conversation about games and the nature of games, and then in the car on the way to Detroit, we talked about, did we talk about games or did we actually, I think we played something. We played a really interesting diceless game, and this is 89, remember? And there were 4 of us, Eric kind of GMing, and the 3 of us essentially running a terraforming project. I think we were terraforming Mars and just working through how we're going to do this. And it took up an 8-hour drive marvelously. Eric was a very, very skilled DM. No dice rolls, nothing at all. You know, time progressed as we made the plans and things happened and things didn't. Just a really smart piece of storytelling. What were your first encounters with diceless role-playing and diceless games generally?
I played Amber Diceless at one small convention, but I remember very little about it other than my buddy who was with me, pretty much his character just got kind of stuck on one of the parallel dimensions, and he's just like, I'm just going to be parallel dimension Batman. I'm just going to beat up criminals. This sounds like super fun to me.
That's great.
You know, I think actually my first experience playing a diceless role-playing game is actually a game from Hogshead Publishing, Pantheon.
Oh, you don't say.
Yeah, no, Pantheon, written by Robin Laws, using the narrative cage match system. And I found a used copy in a game store in this is like third ed days or 3.5 days. So mid 2000s. And I was fascinated with it. So I ran several sessions of it. I think we went through all the scenarios in the book. It's like a 24-page book with 5 different scenarios, and it's kind of a competitive storytelling game. You actually are scored on points at the end based on what kind of narrative tropes you did. So there's a horror movie one, and if this certain characters die, if there's in a certain way following horror movie cliches, then you get points and that kind of thing. That was my introduction to it. And then there's not many others. I saw Noblesse in a game store once, and I was like, "Ooh, that looks cool," but that is a pricey book for a college student, me.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a beautiful book.
I should jump in at this point. For those who don't know the history of the role-playing industry in the late 90s and early 2000s, I ran Hogshead Publishing. I designed the first of the new style games, which Pantheon was, I think, the fourth, which were attempts to just do stuff that weren't conventional role-playing games. The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which was mine, is diceless. Puppet Land, which I think we'll come on to, was diceless. De Profundis is diceless. And of course, I think the only one we did that wasn't diceless was Violence by Designer X, which is actually a parody of existing role-playing games and is therefore allowed to use dice. But yeah, and then we did Nobilis.
Therefore allowed.
Yeah, we gave that one a permit. And Nobilis was the second edition of Jenna Moran's fantastic post-Sandman style game in which you are not gods, but you work for gods and you have godlike powers. A diceless system, which we did essentially as the first coffee table role-playing game with amazing art from amazing artists. Still the favorite thing of mine that I've ever published. Just a beautiful, beautiful book.
My reaction to Nobilis, right, James?
I don't think so.
And I read Nobilis and I couldn't write for like 6 weeks. I was just like, the fuck, man? Why am I sticking my clumsy crab claws into this field of gaming when clearly this pellucidly beautiful, ethereal, perfect thing exists? Why, it's done. Close the door. We're finished. I'm never going to write anything this good. I might as well go to law school.
Yeah, mine was actually fairly similar. I got a copy of the first edition, which David Bolak had published through, I'm sorry, David, I'm forgetting the name of your press, but a much smaller edition. And I read it. It was just like, this is the type of game that I set up Hogshead to publish. I am now going to spend a lot of money acquiring the rights and doing it justice. And we did. And I read it and I thought, this is. I have not read any game as good as this, either in terms of its mechanics and its style, but just the writing is so good. And she's amazing. I love Jenna's stuff. I'm so glad she's still designing in the industry, and writing some really good fiction as well.
I should get into that, but I'm worried it'll set me off again.
At this point, we should probably talk about like what we mean by diceless.
What do we mean when we talk about diceless? Well, and this is I took notes, and I did it like, okay, let's approach diceless games as if they're a specific game that we're gonna autopsy for this podcast. And I'm like, what does it do? And I'm like, well, it removes chaos or constrains it. And so there is the full-on diceless, where it's like, no, nothing is going to be random. And then there's diceless-ish, where it's like, okay, well, there's no dice, but you've got cards. And so you're going to have some randomness. But if your cards are in your hand, the randomness is constrained because you're like, okay, this is a low-stakes conflict. I'm going to play my deuce here, and I'm going to save that king for when shit gets real. And and I've designed an unpublished game along these lines, and I it works. I think I haven't play tested it thoroughly, but in my mind, it works beautifully.
They always do. They always work beautifully in your mind, and then God, the number of games I've seen almost literally turn to a pile of shit on the table. Yeah, it's even veteran games designers, you can't tell just from your own head whether a game is actually going to work. And there will be abject failures. This is a digression. Yeah. Well, but it's an important thing to know, as if you're getting into game design and your game falls apart the moment you put it in front of players, do not be discouraged. It happens to the best of us.
Yes.
And me. I do not include myself in the best.
Well, I think we should talk. Yeah, so Wikipedia actually has an entry on Diceless RPGs, and they do separate the two types of Diceless role-playing games, although primarily, it seems most people, when they refer to Diceless RPGs, they remove randomness as a game element. So they do recognize that some games use other ways to randomize elements, like taking a deck of playing cards, shuffling them and drawing them randomly. Or there's obviously Rocky and Bullwinkle as a role-playing game, which uses a spinner as a randomizer. There is a game, Fate of the Norns, which actually uses a bag building mechanic where you put in different colored stones and draw them to represent like what your character can do in a given. And that's for combat. Like that's their combat system, which seems very interesting. So I'll have to check that out. Everway uses has a fortune deck of
cards.
Yep.
Yes,
and we talked about Dread. You could argue that Jenga does have randomness to it, at least in turn. But
not so much.
I mean, it's
unpredictability rather than random.
It's unpredictable, but not random. Because you think nobody pulls a block thinking this is the one that's gonna drop it. You're always like, I can get away with this. I can escape my hubris. There will be no comeuppance.
Yeah, well, if you're playing outdoors, there is definitely randomness from the wind.
Oh,
so
true. Or in a house with large dogs.
Yep, exactly. So randomness introduced through the Labrador.
You speak of seems inimical to the entire concept of role playing to me.
Well, there are non-randomized role playing games that are entirely free randomness, but there is still uncertainty because you don't know what the other players are going to do.
Right.
Yeah. As I say in a bunch of lectures, the greatest random element in any game are the other players because they are unpredictable, even in chess.
Son of a bitch on the other side of the table.
Yes. If a game had no random elements at all, it would be dull. It wouldn't be a game. It would be a programmed experience.
It would not. It would not necessarily be dull because chess isn't dull. You could set up a game. Let me tell you guys, the dirty trick I was planning on, I considered pulling on you, and I'm like, no, this is too disrespectful. But I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, hey guys, we should just design a Diceless game right now on the air.
Oh?
We should do it in the next 60 minutes. Because I watched the 1988 movie Dead Ringers and had an idea for a diceless way to do a game. My working title for it is Edgelord, and it is basically the game of, okay, you are people who start out a little bit sick and perverse, but everything you do makes everything worse. Again, James, you're going to say, well, you think that it'll work great at the table to just constantly escalate the horror and perversion, but Greg, people can't do that. And yet I'm like, yeah, if you set it up with moves where it's like, okay, yes, I can diminish my stress or my delusional beliefs by 1, but in order to do that, I'm going to have to increase her delusional beliefs by 2. Or, I can get through this one scene seeming perfectly normal. But in order to do that, Ross's character's drug abuse rating is going to have to go up by 1. And you set up this series. If you haven't seen Dead Ringers, a.k.a. the greatest anti-drug PSA ever made, a.k.a. David Cronenberg's Frasier, a.k.a. Jeremy Irons gets robbed of every acting award that 1988 had to offer. Jeremy Irons plays identical twin gynecologists who get hooked on pills, and things get just worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
Based on a true story.
It's a magnificent...
It is.
Oh, really?
It's astonishing. It's an extraordinary movie. I took someone to it on a first date, and that didn't go very far.
Hold on, James. Hold on. Oh, wow. Sorry.
I'll have to check the local recording there. Yeah.
Well,
the
I enjoyed it.
Grinders wasn't playing, James.
Well, it was that or Aladdin.
Yeah. Oh, the movie with a good romantic between the two characters. The whole movie's no. Why would you take that to a first date? No.
But the idea, I'm like, you could set up a role-playing game. You could not set up a campaign, but you could do a single session thing like Dueling Fops, or like, what was the one we talked about with the map drawing? I have forgotten the name.
The Quiet Year.
The Quiet Year. You could set up something like The Quiet Year.
Yeah.
Yup. Where it is, everything is through moves that the players inflict on one another, and it's got a sort of ratchet that only goes one way, that things always have to ultimately become more intense and worse. And again, like chess, this would be a thing where it's like, okay, yeah, eventually this is going to reach some kind of crisis point. And that's why you couldn't do it as a campaign, because the entire point is to have it be so unstable that it blows up in your face entertainingly. So yeah, that is the game I want to do at some point after I, finish the other 5 projects I'm working on right now.
Only 5.
The one thing I've seen from all the Diceless RPGs is that they're very strongly narratively focused, and they're much more focused on story. I mean, they're more focused on storytelling than, say, like, obviously a game like Phoenix Command or or any of the
Lancer, to give an example. We've covered.
Yes, exactly, Lancer, which does have narrative elements, but Lancer is a game of tactical combat and being able to overcome great odds, and like through clever use of abilities and synergy with teamwork. Like these are more about everyone getting together to make a story and having tools to facilitate that, mechanics to facilitate that. I was looking through commentary and discussion on this, and one great point that someone on Reddit had about it was that dice are a randomizing element in games to make sure no one's clear how the story is going to resolve, right? There's always going to be critical hit or failure, but like diceless games still they don't have that randomness, right? But they do still have uncertainty, because as you mentioned, James, like humans are the greatest randomizing factor in games. Like you never know what they're going to do or say next.
What was the name of your player from the RPPR who's always just like, and now I'm gonna just do this innocent thing that makes everything go splody?
That's probably Aaron. Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah, Aaron does.
He's great.
There are a lot of games where Aaron does something and it's just like, I'm struggling to catch up with what he's going off on. Like, I'm going to jump out of the ship and attack the sharks. I'm going to run up the hill and charge the sniper while I'm unarmed.
In Dork Tower terms, he's an Igor.
Yeah.
So
he's the wild card. You got to have the wild card.
Yeah, and a game has to be designed to accommodate wildcards as well. Otherwise, it's not working.
Well, because the wild card is the thing gaming. I've said this before. Wildness is the thing gaming, tabletop role-playing games do that computer games can't.
Right.
I mean, if you put Aaron in Warframe, he would be trying to figure out how his Warframe could open a pastry shop.
There was a perception when the first Diceless games, particularly Amber, came out, that what Diceless meant is ceding entire control of the story to the GM. And they got a lot of criticism for that, because Amber does do that. Amber has this very particular setup where, because all the characters in a group are siblings, you start the game with this brilliant piece of design, one of the best character generation systems I've ever seen, where you basically the ability to be best in each of the auctions, in each of the attributes, is auctioned off by the GM. And you start off with a pool of points. And so it'll have a numerical value, but that's not as important as whether you are better or worse than the other players in the group. And the rule is simply, if you're better, you win, given any situation. You can talk out that, but if it's a straight contest, then the player with the better attribute wins. I don't think there's any skills in it. But if you can think of something skeevy to do, or you can pull in something from left field, and this is not one of those games, because it's 1991, this is not a game where the players are allowed to alter much of the structure of the world, except they can walk through parallel universes. It's entirely possible they can tweak the universe around them. They can surreptitiously move through universes or stage the fight in a universe where unexpected things are going to happen. So it is quite possible for a player to get narrative advantage by setting stuff up in advance. But the character auction, so you spend however many points you've got. If you don't spend all your points, it turns into what is literally known in the rules as good stuff. And if you overspend, it turns into bad stuff. And this is a general kind of luck stat, but the GM brings that to bear. Theatrics, which came along a couple of years later, designed by a team of people. I've got the list here: David Berkman, Travis Enix, Andrew Finch, Anthony Gallela, and Brett Hackett. Anthony, I used to know reasonably well. He did a lot of work for Gamma and for other people it was, as the name suggests, it was an attempt to do theatrical, very much story-based role-playing. It's diceless, but it has a meta currency. And they are called plot points specifically, and they come, you can spend plot points to twist situations to your advantage, but also you can tell that, you get into an encounter, your character is a particular type, they're an archetype, or they've got a relevant skill. You can say that, and that can change the format of the encounter, not just the way the player, the NPC responds to you. It's kind of interesting. It never really caught on. It's because the basic rules are generic as well. I think they did a couple of add-on packs for it. There's some clever ideas in there, but by then, a number of people were already kind of set against the idea of diceless roleplay. And then Hogshead came along, and we did, the point of new style games, which was an accident because Baron Munchausen was not intended to succeed. It was intended to be a game with my name on it from my publishing company to scratch that itch. And I thought we'd do 2,000 copies and that would be it. And nobody would remember it except me. And the fact that it's, the third edition from Fantasy Flight was a full color hardback boggles me to this day. But that, we spun that off into the new style game. Of basically, the point of new style was to push the envelope so hard that it fell off the table and interesting things fell out. We wanted to see what role-playing games could be. And we didn't expect them all to be successful, but some of them weren't. But the one that, I'm proud of all of them, but we published on Titans is Puppetland. Puppetland had already been published by a British role-playing magazine,
right?
Arcane magazine in the UK, and I think 95 had done it as a little booklet because that form of the game was very short. And Tynes, I think, had it up in his website since about 93. It's very early. And Puppetland is a game in which you're a puppet, and it's played in 1 hour sessions, which are literally an hour long. And it's brilliant and diceless and wholly narrative, completely narrative, in the sense that you
extremely dark. You may be thinking these are fun puppets, but the backstory is that you're puppets who came to life in the ghetto as the Nazis are coming to power, and your whole world was built by this Jewish puppet maker who's been murdered
by one of the puppets who has built his soldiers out of the flesh of the puppet maker and built a mask out of the skin of the puppet maker. It's dark and it's bleak, and you're essentially the puppet resistance. But it has this wonderful narrative form in that you don't say, "Oh, my character does this," or you don't say, "I do this." You give your lines as if they are lines in a storybook. You are narrating the story to an audience that isn't present. So you would say, "Oh no!" cries Sally Hennypenny and rushes down the road in pursuit of the runaway, whatever it is.
I thought it was all that you had to be like a puppet in a puppet show, and they narrate their own and now I shall go strike that naughty alligator with my bat because of his naughtiness. Oh, take that, alligator! I shall smack you hard. And it's extremely artificial, and yet everyone gets how it works.
I think you're right. I actually have a copy of the third edition, which again, from something that started off as a free download on a website and then became a booklet and then a 24-page, pamphlet, let's call it a pamphlet from Hogshead, is now available as a gorgeous full-color hardback, including many, many scenarios and adventure ideas and stuff by writers, including myself. And Greg, are you in there?
No, I'm not. But
I
got a free copy.
Not happen. It's a stunningly beautiful book and an absolute milestone in roleplay and clever roleplay design.
In the newest edition, they asked for other people to write little stories at the end. I actually wrote one or two for that.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know you were in there.
Yeah.
Should have.
So you're surprised he's in and you're surprised I'm out. Damn, James.
Yeah, well, the thing is, at the time it came out, I didn't know Ross. Yeah, Gareth Ryder Hanrahan who we've talked about before. Yeah, there we go. Over touring the factory, overtime in the factory. Jason Morningstar, Matt Forback, 2 from you, Ross. Wow, I'll go away and reread those.
Yeah,
once I've got my old glasses on.
We actually did like a actual play of those RPPR. We used actual puppets too. We made a little video of it.
Oh,
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Mm.
and it was quite fun. Yeah, Puppet Land's a very interesting game because, as you mentioned, everything's narrated as though it was a children's story.
A children's story that's not appropriate for children.
Well, I mean, you don't have to play it that way. You can ignore, like, the from what I remember, the puppet maker is definitely killed by Punch, and like there's the the bodies are, so it's very Grimm's fairy tale, right? And the stuff about the real world is actually kind of like in the new edition, sort of like not really, it's hinted at, but it's left vague enough that you don't have to engage with that if you don't want to. But like your character is defined by like, what kind of puppet are you? Are you a finger puppet, a marionette, a shadow puppet? And then I think that's basically, if you try and do something you're not able to do, you take essentially damage. You fill in,
and you tear off a corner of the character sheet, right? Or no, it's a little puzzle. Yes.
Yeah, but there's also other damage. So we're not going to like explain all the rules, but it's very simple. But once the jigsaw is entirely filled in, you're no longer able to play that particular puppet. It's a really interesting game, but I think the real key to it is that it is meant to emulate this type of narrative and go from there. Yeah, as an experiment in storytelling, it's beautiful, and I think everybody should play it once, because when you play it, the thing that you have to narrate what you're doing is something that it's so hard to like get into, but once you get into it, it develops a kind of beautiful rhythm of everyone like, oh yeah, now we're really getting into like this weird, messed up fantasy world. And I think that's what the Diceless games. That's the intention, right? Like, I think in general is they're trying to get help. They're doing these things to help you get into the story.
Yes.
Yes.
So would you say the purpose of Diceless is immersion?
I think it removes a distraction, or it can. Some of the systems can remove a distraction and focus on the narrative. And within the tripartite system of or theory of game designers put forward by the Forge in the early 2000s, most Diceless games are very firmly narrativist. They're about the story. If you don't know this triangle, it's the idea that there is a triangle. At one point, you have ludic games that are explicitly about games. At another, there is simulation, and the third point is narrative or narrativist games. And very few games are just at one point, but almost all role-playing games can be plotted somewhere on this, this graph, this field. And yes, certainly the early Diceless games are much more about the story and allowing the story to flow more freely, because the moment you pull out dice and you start thinking about modifiers and talking about numbers, it removes you, it takes you up a level or out of a level of the story itself to another level of the game experience.
Immersion gives way to tactics.
Often tactics, yes.
Yeah, because as we mentioned, like some of them are more competitive, or like Amber, you're all like siblings competing for power, right? And then
and there's still tactics within that. You're competing tactically, but it's not game tactics.
And in Pantheon, narrative cage match, there's literally you're scoring points. You're trying to get the most points at the end of the game by fulfilling most of the narrative cliches and tropes. And yeah, so I don't think immersion is for some. I guess there is a division between what is immersive and what is not, right? Like Puppet Land is very immersive because you're trying to evoke this very particular vibe. But like there are games that are not doing that as much, and they're more abstracted, like narrative cage match. I would argue maybe Hillfolk would be to a degree, although there is a randomizing deck of cards that you draw from for certain procedural scenes.
Did either of you guys read In Space? My Diceless game.
I think you promised me a copy of it, and it is yet to be forthcoming.
It's a free download. It's a free download online, my dude.
Damn it, man! Give me a copy. The gift is important.
Do I look like I have time to download things free off the internet still? Okay.
No, if I download it goes in my download folder with about 3 gigabytes of other stuff that I haven't looked at since I downloaded it either.
So it's probably, so I could probably just tell you it's there and you'd believe me.
Go
But
for it,
the
man.
idea, the system behind In Space is, I call it the token effort system. And basically it's whenever anyone wants anything to happen, they can say, I am bidding this many tokens to have it happen. And if you lose, you get one of the winner's tokens, one of the tokens from the people who bet against you. But, and you know, the traits you have give you free virtual tokens in these bidding wars. The special sauce on this burger is that anytime you laugh, you must give a token to the person who made you laugh. And
Yes.
what this does is, as the game gets funnier, the people who make it funnier accrue greater and greater narrative control. In my notes, I'm making notes about, Diceless games, and I'm like, tokens become negotiation, an economy of narrative control and desire. And I'm like, man, economies of narrative control and desire sounds like an IF article right there, James. You'd have published that, wouldn't you?
I would have done. Again, we should probably explain. An early Hogshead Publishing thing was a quasi-academic journal called Interactive Fantasy, which was a journal of role-playing and storytelling systems. And we were attempting, because nobody else was looking at this stuff seriously, we tried to see if there was a market and an audience. And what we discovered is, yes, there was an audience of people who were really enthusiastic about this stuff, and there was no way to market to them directly, or to at least to get product to them. So we lost money on 4 issues and closed it. But along the way, we published some really interesting stuff, including about diceless games and narrative and immersion and lots of other stuff. They are available as a free download, speaking of free downloads, from DriveThru RPG. A lot of the contents have dated, but Greg Kostikian's article in number 2, I Have No Words and I Must Design, remains a masterpiece, and is actually on a bunch of game design, university level game design reading lists.
And is that available online now? Sorry.
Yeah, that's all on. It's on DriveThru.
Okay,
you can download for free.
Great. Listening to all these, and reading through my own these Diceless games, it does seem you can kind of subcategorize them, right, into what mechanics they do you use in order to like provide structure to the game or uncertainty. Some of them are bidding mechanics, as we just heard from Greg. Puppet Land has this kind of like literally role playing, like acting, like you have to act in a certain way. They also, a lot of them all have resource management as a mechanic. Like you have X amount of resources to do this X, Y, or Z, right? Or turn taking mechanics. And I wonder if there are, and there obviously some of them, one of them at least has a scoring mechanic, Pantheon. But I wonder if there are any other types of mechanics that they use that we haven't overlooked. I was going to say 10 Candles, but I just skimmed, because I haven't played 10 Candles, but I thought it was a Diceless game. But I just skimmed a review, and it does have a single dice roll mechanic in it too, which is a shame, because 10 Candles is great. You literally light candles and put them out as you go through scenes, and you can literally burn note cards that you've put various character attributes on as a mechanic. But you do use a dice roll in that game for determining whether a scene ends well or poorly for the character in question.
Never heard a single bad thing about 10 Candles.
Yeah, it's just not dice. It does have dice, so but yeah, I'm trying to think if there are any other subcategories of diceless games that we haven't really, because it really does seem like resource management and bidding seem to be, and or auction mechanics seem to be the big sub flavors.
But I think because a lot of them they break down essentially the structure of narrative and try and turn that, the turn taking and how you do scenes and all the rest of that. And a lot of that does come out of the, I think, diceless rather than dice-based games. So a lot of them are trying to manipulate that kind of thing, and they move away from the gaminess that's dominated role-playing games. And as I've said before, probably too often, role-playing games derived originally out of war games, and a lot of the dice stuff continues. That's where it comes from. It comes out of the war game tradition of randomness, even though I was this afternoon flipping through H.G. Wells's Little Wars for a completely separate project. Little Wars, if you don't know it, published, I believe, 1911 or 1912. It is the first mass market war game written by H.G. Wells, and it is diceless. And the reason it's diceless is because the way you fight is you've got little spring-loaded cannons and you fire matchsticks at the opposing army, and they have blast radii and splash damage. It's interesting. In some ways, it's massively ahead of its time. In other ways, it's incredibly primitive, and you cannot buy that kind of spring-loaded cannon anymore.
I had it in my head that H.G. Wells was technically a nerd, but now I'm like, no, he's just a full-ass nerd. If he's building tiny spring-based cannons for his homebrew war game, he's got the capital N nerd.
You could buy them. That's the thing. He basically goes, go down to the toy shop, buy this particular spring-loaded cannon. Because it was 1911 and the British Empire was at its height, and of course we had models of all our armies and all the various ethnic types that we were regularly cutting swathes through. Yeah, thankfully Wells doesn't get into that because he was a solid liberal. But there's quite a lot of talk about defeating. I think he just they're just opposing armies, but it's fairly clear that quite often one of them is probably French. Because why wouldn't it be 1911? But once you get away from the dice tradition, and it becomes kind of a handicap to a lot of designers. You just assume, and as I did for a long time, that role-playing games have dice in them. The moment you move away from this, and we said this in the Dread episode as well, it really frees your mind about how you can construct a story within this group storytelling theatre of the round table role-playing experience. And there are games that have done some different stuff with it. Some narrative, and some have moved away. The one I've never seen, and I'm absolutely intrigued by, is the Marvel Universe RPG, which is the RPG that Marvel published in 2003 because for a long time TSR had the Marvel license and did a bunch of different games. They did the Marvel superheroes, but they also did one based on the Saga system, which was their card system that they did in the half-size boxes. There was a Dragonlance game, and I think we touched on it very briefly in the card episode. But finally, that connection to TSR stroke Wizards of the Coast was broken. 2003, they did their own role-playing game, and it is a diceless game. And it's based on CCG mechanics. It's not a CCG, but it's based on that style of card fighting mechanics. And it's really interesting from what I've read of it. As I say, I've never actually seen a copy. But it sounds like it's, as Lancer, which we referred to, and a number of others, turned the conflict essentially into a game. And the structure of a superhero combat is different to the structure of a fantasy game combat or a science fiction game because, mighty superheroes slug it out and one of them slinks off to lick their wounds, but will return later on. There's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of knocking numbers down.
There's not the fantasy role-playing game presumption of fatality.
No. Or looting and grabbing stuff. Yeah. It's, there's the assumption that one of you will be defeated or will run away.
Can you imagine a superhero game that was based on the assumption, on murder hobo assumptions, where it's like, oh, sorry, man, they beat you. Now they've got your power armor. Vulture's got the repulsor rays. But that goblin glider that you stole from the Green Goblin, he's got it back now. He's super pissed.
Yeah. The second campaign I think ever ran was Villains and Vigilantes for my D&D group, and that's how they played it. It's like, we've defeated a villain, we get their stuff. And it was. I think we got 3 sessions in before they were just so ridiculously powerful that we simply never played it. But yeah, that's an interesting one because it retains the gaminess that a lot of the dice systems have, but does it without dice, and was apparently well received. People enjoyed it. It lasted reasonably well. There's now, of course, there's a new Marvel coming out imminently. I think the playtest.
I think it's already out, or at least
is it?
Wow. There's at least a version of it floating around. I know someone who worked on it, and they're talking about like maybe it was a beta version of it or something, but it was available in print. At
least. This is Forbeck's baby, right?
Forbeck and Simeon Cogswell. And,
I didn't know Simeon got in on this. Lucky guy.
They've been very successful in this.
He's gonna make it look so purty.
Yeah. No. I think they're doing design work on it. Yeah. James, when you're talking, it kind of made me realize that when you're designing, you're setting out, and you realize, oh, I don't have to use dice. There is kind of like this, like when you're a budding RPG designer, and you I want to make a game. I feel like there's kind of like two mindsets, right? Like in one broad sense is one, my goal is to tell a story through a game, or I want to make a game that creates a story. And I think those are two very different things.
I'll stretch that further.
Yeah.
A thought that was developing in my pointy little head was that there has always been a tension. There is this uneasy marriage between the literary aspects of the role-playing game endeavor, where it's like, I want to create an amazing story with great characterization and description and all the bells and whistles of literature and plot and character development and arcs and all that. And then on the other hand, married to this, but on a long car ride where they're bickering about everything, is the game-ishness of it, where it's like, okay, everything is going to be, simulated by rolling dice. And, if you are a stronger person, if you're 40% stronger, you should have a 40% advantage when you're struggling with someone, regardless of whether they killed your pappy and whether this is a satisfying narrative arc for you to struggle. They struggle and they contend, and yet they stay together because I do feel that they do things together that neither one can do independently. If you don't have the plotty stuff, you wind up with chess, where it's like, oh yeah, of course the rook overcame the bishop because it was a horizontal movement and the bishop couldn't get away with it, and there's no personality or emotional resonance. Whereas if you try to do everything in a very literary way that can work, and I think a lot of Diceless stuff leans towards this very literary approach, but the drawback to removing the wild, chaotic dice can be that it's very easy to go with your lazy first thought or your typical tropey first thought. Let me find it. There's a gun in my notes, and who's heard the phrase magical tea party used derisively for games that don't engage randomness and rules often enough? And
similar phrases,
and it's an insult. And yet I'm like, man, what is wrong with sitting around telling a cool story with your friends? But the chaotic 1% outcomes of the dice are like, well, actually in this instance, Sam Gamgee cleans Aragorn's clock, and nobody expects that. And so now you have to deal with it, and it kicks your creativity into a different direction. And I think a lot of people love that. Love having to think on their feet. But a lot of Diceless games are like, okay, think on your feet in response to the random whack stuff of James across the table, rather than the random whack stuff of rolling a 1 on a D20.
And those are excellent points. If we look at two games that we reviewed in the first season, like Wanderhome and Lancer, which we've already mentioned, Wanderhome is very much in that like magical tea party.
We did not review Wanderhome.
Oh, sorry.
I really wanted us to review Wanderhome.
Oh, that's right. It was on the list of games to review.
Yeah. I love
thinking of The Quiet Year.
Quiet Year. Yeah, that's also an example. So The Quiet Year versus Lancer. So The Quiet Year is very much in the mode of like, I want to create a mechanism that facilitates telling a story. So it's going to be a game that tells a story, helps people get together and tell a story. And that is, I think, what Diceless RPGs in general are doing. But contrast that with a game that creates a story, because Lancer is a game, and it is a game about robots, mechs fighting each other. And a story happens because of that game, because there is like a narrative stakes, and like we know what these robots are, but the outcome in so I think the difference is like in Lancer, it's, you know, like, well, look at sports, right? Like in sports, we have narratives. We develop like, this is the underdog team. This is the great team, and it doesn't there. We care about the outcome of this. We want the team that we root for to win. And there's feel good stories, and there's victory, defeat.
Will it be Nancy Kerrigan or Tanya Hart?
Well, not even that, but just like, oh, this football team, this sport team they deserve the win, but they were cruelly denied, or this or that. And
having lived in Cubs territory, I feel
there are exactly, there are all these related elements, but like the outcome of the game has very little bearing on the narrative side of it, and so there is this sort of division. And we there's this cruel randomness that the team we think should win deserves to win does not win, and
But the meta-narrative there is constrained and is all laid out. There are only a finite number of ways the season can end. There's not going to be some massive unexpected thing. Some team from the league below is not going to suddenly, I mean, I suppose it could happen. A team is wiped out in a plane crash, which did happen in the UK a few decades ago. The great Manchester United team was decimated. But there was no great, let's pull out the top side from the league below and give them a fighting chance. And no, it didn't happen. It's never going to go completely off road like that. The only place where mad surprises like that will happen are in the great place where storytelling and sports come together, which is pro wrestling, because it's not really sport. Sorry, spoilers. Because it is scripted. There's improvisation within it. But and there are levels of pro wrestling that is complete.
But
it's a performance. Yeah.
Yes, it's kayfabe. It's pretend. And so you can have massive unexpected things because they're only unexpected to the audience. All the performers know what's scripted. And I think that's really interesting. And of course, it has a massive global following, particularly among, I think, younger viewers who get completely into it. They sell action figures for it. It's usually a hint that something has been geared perhaps more towards children. It's when they started doing RoboCop action figures that you started to think, oh, maybe they've moved away from the first movie now. Or indeed the second one, which is...
Yeah.
I just prefer not. Let's not digress onto RoboCop because I would be here all night.
And it'll make you sad.
Yeah.
It will. But so there is that element of constraining the narrative with rules in a way that it's still going to be unexpected and occasionally delightfully madly so, but not because I take your point about mad rolls leading to huge creativity and the completely unexpected stuff. If you've plotted the campaign out over 20 sessions and that happens, I roll to seduce the king in the third session, you hit the 0-0, you crit your success. It's, for the GM, that's, wow, fantastic evening storytelling and invention. But if you're the kind of GM who creates not just the story, but the whole, the characters' arcs and how it's all going to play out, I think that's where a diceless game has the advantage, because players can still do the unexpected in that,
right?
But there are limits to to how far off the rails it can go. And I'm not saying these need to be on rails adventures, but you need to be heading in the general direction of a destination. And often the GM does have a destination in mind, sometimes more than one. And I think for me, a good GM is leading you somewhere, or is at least signposting you towards stuff. Yeah. Yes.
And the most plot random stuff that I have ever played and run has been in space, because so much narrative authority is given to the players, and they're just like, I'm going to take this in a new way. And it's like, oh, yeah, I figured this was going to be a very simple, this guy stole something from all of us and we're going to go get our stuff back. And suddenly it has spiraled out into interstellar diplomacy, romance, and cosmic horror somehow. And the end is just one of the characters succumbing to the void, but like erotically. I didn't see any of that coming.
Roll to seduce the void.
Yeah.
They never got their stuff back.
We've established that I haven't read In Space. Is it a single session game? Is it geared towards single session play?
It can be, but it can run a campaign. You can do it. It is a GM and players separate thing, but it gives a lot more power to the players than is typical.
Mm-hmm.
So you, as a GM, you can wind up doing things you didn't really want to do.
So I have a thesis about this. It's not an entirely developed thesis, but I think one of the things that because Amber is trying to be a traditional role-playing game that happens not to have diceless mechanics. The moment you move away from that, and as I've said before, with Munchausen, it was almost accidental. I didn't realize I was designing something that was not like any other previous role-playing game while I was doing it. I knew it was different, and I knew it was fun. Hadn't crossed my mind that this was something entirely new. The diceless format, or certain forms of diceless play, do lend themselves much more to single-session games than necessarily campaign games. And I don't remember there being many single-session games before diceless games came along. Because Pantheon is single-session.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Puppet Land is pretty. You can play it as a campaign, but it's more kind of stories that fit together to create a campaign.
Episodic.
And each story is episodic. Munchausen very much single session. Theatrics, I think, never actually played it.
I thought Theatrics was more campaigny, but that is a very vague recollection.
I mean, I imagine Call of Cthulhu, even in the original 80s, was very one shot. I mean, I don't know, having not played Call of Cthulhu in the 80s. I did have a fair number of campaigns, but
I mean, I think because it was based on the traditional stuff. My memory of reading it back then is not that it was geared around single shot adventures. Yeah.
That's fair.
There were single shot adventures. That's White Dwarf and Dragon and stuff were printing
conventional,
4-page, 6-page adventures that you would play in an evening. And that was fine. But the idea is then you'd carry on your characters. Whereas I think diceless, the moment you remove the constraints of the dice and you start to think about different formats, there's something within the diceless format or certain diceless formats that lends itself very well to just doing a single story in an evening and bringing it round to a conclusion, not having that massive open sandbox of areas that people can explore and where players can take the lead from the GM. Because it is...
I could tell you what that is, James, is that it favors plot. It favors the literary more than the Ludo side of the tension. And so it's like, well, it favors plot so much that you can get a whole season's worth of plot into an evening. Whereas if you wait for that much plot to grow organically out of dice rolls and decisions and tactical combat resolution, it takes a lot longer because the production of plot is incidental to the cool fight scene.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point about like it being geared towards one shots. And I think part of it could be, if we were to compare them to sports, like the diceless game is more like, as we mentioned, like wrestling, right? And building this narrative, but with still like uncertain elements in there, like the audience participation. How do they like, a given wrestling match? That'll determine if the wrestler's coming back, right? Versus, say, the football or soccer or whatever of like games that have dice in them, randomized element. So maybe the campaign element is more like a season of a sport in the sense that like there's a longer outcome, and like the randomization does then create like more narrative. Like how much scripting can you do through these narrative tools of diceless games, like to carry a multi-session story arc, but like by adding randomization in, like then the dice becomes sort of a co-author, because then you have to adapt to that.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. It's a challenge, but like diceless games then give you that amount of control is harder to carry, especially because it's collaborative and still improvised, right? Like you get a group of people together to tell a story, but like one story from one evening is easy to like have a beginning, middle, and end. But then like how do you plot multiple sessions of that unless it's again episodic? Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, I do not have a fully formed thesis here. I'm not doing a PhD on this stuff. Diceless games have a facet that I haven't seen in other forms of games, which are games that don't have combat systems. And I'm particularly thinking, I'm pretty sure Wanderhome doesn't have a combat system.
No, it does not.
And the other one that I actually have to hand here is Golden Sky Stories, which is originally a Japanese game, which I think came out in the early 2000s, which is really interesting time-wise for where it puts it in terms of the development of the form. Didn't come out in English until, I think, 2011. But it's about small stories. It's kind of anime. It's kind of Studio Ghibli-esque, except small story anime stuff. It's in tone, actually. It's not a million miles away from Wanderhome. But it's Wanderhome is bigger stories because you're refugees and you're traveling. Golden Sky Stories is, essentially kids or teenagers or something who have animal forms and there are problems and they overcome them. But there is no explicit combat system. And it comes out of the Japanese school of role play, which is much more GM dominated. It is the GM is telling you a story and you are taking part and making decisions, but the GM knows where this is going and ultimately has a thing. And in fact, there's a section in the game that says we have toned this down for this English language release, but there are still heavy elements of that. And I think that leans into dicelessness. And it's a diceless game and does not have.
Well, and this is, what I was talking about, Amber Diceless, I heard that it's like, GM's got the whip hand, and that's Amber being Amber. You can discuss with the GM when he says, no, that doesn't happen, but you don't really have any recourse. You can't rules lawyer it. You cannot, ask for a re-roll. It's just like, no, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. But then there's been an element of that in role-playing from the early days of GMs taking control. Gary Gygax said a good GM only rolls the dice for the sound they make. I was there when he said it. I don't think it was the first time he said it. I think it was a well-worn catchphrase by that point. But I heard him say it in 1983, I think. God, I'm old.
But you wear it well, James.
If you're rolling the dice and ignoring the results, is that a diceless game?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the problem with that though is in Dungeons and Dragons, the DM does not control all of the dice. Like,
True.
Yeah, he could be rolling the dice for effect and just hiding them behind the GM screen and saying whatever he wants to. But that does not prevent the player from rolling a natural 20 when he doesn't want I'm just going to attack the big bad evil guy with my one-shot kill spell, and I roll, or my one-shot kill weapon or whatever, and look, I rolled a natural 20, so I do, and I'm rolling max damage, so he's dead.
I remember this in Order of the Stick, where, it's like, wow, that, you really killed that thing in like 3 blows. Yeah, I felt really lucky. And after it had told you its name and everything, that really felt like something we were gonna see again and again and have a relationship. Yeah, well, fuck it, it's dead now.
Yeah, so even the most railroading GM cannot dictate I rolled an 18. Oh no, you rolled a 5. You can't there's no game mechanic outside of I said so. It's not provided in most games. Yeah.
With the sort of GM knows best approach, where the GM is the story tyrant, the dice were like your buffer. You could always fall back and hope for that great dice result that would protect you from the caprices of your GM. And the fact that we've talked before on here about the move away from antagonistic play towards cooperative play. And so, if you came up with antagonistic expectations, then Diceless looks like this, like, well, I mean, in one way, it's just removing the pretense that you have this recourse. It's like, yeah, if the GM says no, that's no.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I'm just going to try to get into the story that the game moderator has in mind, because this is everything is bound towards that. There isn't going to be the randomness of the dice to interrupt that flow, which has its pluses and minuses. I mean, if you're playing with someone who's got a really great idea, cool. And who really is your character's biggest fan, I'm sure that's extremely fun. If you've got an arrogant dickhead who's power tripping, man, it's like, oh yeah, instead of burning out over 3 sessions, this is going to burn out in 45 minutes, and we will all learn our painful lesson efficiently.
There is one other Diceless game I do want to, mostly Diceless. Well, I mean, it's Diceless, but Alice is Missing is a game,
yes.
2020 that is played entirely by text messages. Now, it is not technically a fully Diceless game because it does have random elements in the forms of various decks of cards that are drawn or shuffled and random to randomize clues, suspects, locations, and motivations. But other than that, it is handled through text messaging, and that is something to look at.
I will say there's so much good stuff out on itch, little games with really smart ideas, pushing the boundaries of, exactly the stuff that we were trying to do with Hogshead 25 years ago with the New Style line. There are people out there just doing this on itch, and it's really hard to know where to start because it's its own culture and it's running away really fast. But it is worth backing. Every so often there is a disaster, and the good thing that comes out of that is creators banding together to create bundles, fundraising bundles on itch. You can get an awful lot of extraordinary, groundbreaking, edge-pushing games and give money to charity at the same time. It's an absolute win-win, and you can find complete treasures in there. And I'm afraid none of them are coming to mind because that's how bad my memory is these days. But there's so much invention. There's so much clever stuff, using different forms of unpredictability in games, whether that's a traditional randomizer or a new form of a randomizer or something that we've not come across before, new ways of mixing up random elements to tell a story, whether, a lot of solo games. I mean, solo games kind of need random elements or some form of randomizers. Otherwise, they're going to be exactly the same every time you play them with the same prompts coming up at the same time.
Yeah, now it's a computer game without a computer.
Yes, and computer games have been doing this for ages. Visual novels are the same every time. To an extent, solo game books as well. The Endless Quest books, they choose your own adventures in the States. Fighting fantasy games over here. Yeah, you'll come up against a monster and you fight the monster, and do you succeed or do you fail? And sometimes there are clever stuff and traps you've got to work out. And I think the original Warlock of Firetop Mountain over here was the final puzzle. You have to add together a bunch of numbers that you've discovered along the way, or use those to unlock a final thing. And then literally the number that you come up with is the number of the paragraph you need to turn to. And that's a really nice piece of game design. And it could do it very easily, Diceless, and it is so, but it's going to be the same every time you play it. Hasn't hurt them selling 7 million copies. I think it's more than that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, extraordinary numbers. People are fine rerunning stories they love. It's why you watch Star Wars over and over again. You're not doing it to see new things in the plot every time. You're doing it because it's familiar and it's lovely. People rerun the Dragon Age games, the Mass Effect games over and over and over again. And they're not going to be exactly the same because there's enough choices, enough things to do within that format. But it is, I think we finally hit the moment that whether a game is Diceless or not does not matter anymore unless you are part of the old school and you love your polyhedrals. God knows I love my polyhedrals. There's an awful lot of people out there with enormous dice collections, people making businesses entirely out of dice, and my hat is off to them. But you don't need them for games. But just because your game doesn't need dice, you can still buy the polyhedrals. It's fine. We will not hold it against you. I look over, I have a stack of lovely dice on the shelf over to my left as I'm speaking. Haven't touched them for a little while.
I still love random stuff. I still love the hope that, I've only got a 25% chance of saving Ross's character, but damn it, I'm going to roll those. It's a 17! It's a 17! Ross lives!
Or it's 100 and oh no, it's...
I've doomed us all.
Yeah,
I'm dead too.
Yeah.
Well, that's a cool story too.
Right, and that's the reason, and part of that uncertainty is the reason why we like going to sports, and why we like... playing the kind of games that have dice in them. But I
really think the Generals are going to take it away from the Globetrotters this time.
Yeah, well, see, that's the storytelling game, right? That's where the outcome is more certain, and it's more about the story of it. And so, do you want to take turns making a story, or do you want to play a game that creates a story? I think that's what it boils down to. Both approaches are very fun, but they're very different experiences.
Yes. Yeah. And asking one to be the other is probably not going to get you anywhere you want to be.
Yeah, that's for sure. So yeah, I think that was. I don't think. Yeah, we kind of nailed it. I think
we did it. We solved Diceless games.
We solved it.
Good job. On to the next all around.
Yeah. On to the next thing. Our next episode is going to be about a technically diceless game. Fiasco Second Edition uses cards. The first edition does use dice, but more as a resource. You don't really roll to determine events. It's just
God, I love Fiasco. I love it so much.
Yeah, I have not played second edition, so I'm intrigued to check that out. That'll be something fun to look at. Before we go, I would also like to thank Max Nestorich. He is a good friend, a friend of mine in real life. Max runs Good Brews, Bad Views podcast and Relatable Roles, which is an RPG podcast. And I've guested on that at least once. Maybe, yeah, I've been on so many podcasts, I don't remember. But anyways, hello, Max. Thank you for supporting Ludonarrative Dissidents. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
And it falls to me to thank Dan VK, who I don't think I know. I don't think our paths have crossed. And knowing my luck will turn out to be a dice impresario and entrepreneur, frothing at the mouth with reddened eyes, even as he listens to these words. If that is the case, I'm deeply sorry, Dan VK, but we are enormously grateful for your support of the podcast nonetheless.
Thank you all for listening. And also, if you have not yet, please rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you use to listen to Ludonarrative Dissidents. Please rate and review it, and tell your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies, tell your frenemies, spread the word. And we also have a Discord. We'll have a link in the show notes. You can jump in there and discuss this episode or any other episode.
It's a pretty fun Discord.
It's a pretty fun Discord.
It's great. And we have a website now as well, www.ludonarrativedissidents.com, where this episode will be.
Shockingly, no one had already taken that.
Yeah, strange. But yeah, and that's looking pretty sweet as well.
Yes, and that'll have links to all the games we talk about and links to the episodes. So, cool. Well, we will talk to you all later. Bye.